The neighbors on Hawthorne Crescent would later remember the silence most of all, the kind that feels too heavy for a house with lights on. Emily Carter had never planned to fall for a man like Marcus Hale. Not because she didn't believe in love, but because love, in her world, had always come wrapped in overdue bills, broken washing machines, and the soft panic of counting coins at the kitchen table. She was 26, a single mother with tired eyes that still tried to look hopeful. Every morning started the same, a cheap kettle hissing, her little boy Noah asking for cereal, and Emily pulling on a uniform that smelled faintly of disinfectant from the care home where she worked. She didn't hate her job. She hated how invisible it made her feel. Emily lived in a narrow rental flat above a corner shop, where the hallway always carried the scent of frying oil and damp cardboard. At night, once Noah finally slept, she'd sit by the window and watch people pass under streetlights, laughing, arguing, living lives that looked lighter than hers. Then, one Friday evening, her coworker dragged her out for one drink. Emily almost said no. Noah had a babysitter, money was tight, and she was exhausted down to her bones. But something in her, a small, stubborn ember, wanted to remember what it felt like to be young. The bar was loud, all clinking glasses and music that rattled in the ribs. Emily stood near the edge, nursing a soda, when she noticed him watching her. Marcus Hale looked like he belonged in rooms Emily had only seen in films. He was early 30s, sharply dressed, confident in a way that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. When he approached, his smile didn't ask permission. It simply arrived, warm and certain. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, leaning in just enough to be heard. Emily let out a laugh that surprised her. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there," Marcus replied. He spoke like he knew her, like he could see the strain behind her polite expressions. He asked about her, and when she mentioned Noah, he didn't flinch or change the subject. Instead, he listened. Really listened. Emily felt something loosen inside her chest, like a knot she hadn't known she was holding. They exchanged numbers. She told herself it was harmless. By the next morning, there was a message waiting: "Coffee? I know a quiet place. No pressure." And then another: "Hope you got home safe." It was fast. So fast that Emily didn't have time to build the walls she usually relied on. Within a week, Marcus was picking her up in a sleek car that smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Within 2, he was sending flowers to the care home, bright, dramatic bouquets that made her coworkers squeal and gossip. Within 3, he was offering her weekends that felt like someone else's life, hotel lobbies with chandeliers, room service trays, soft robes, and city views that glowed like jewelry. Emily told herself she deserved it. That it was finally her turn to be chosen. Marcus bought Noah toys without being asked. He slid a designer bag across the table like it was nothing. He laughed when Emily protested, brushing it away with a kiss to her knuckles. "Let me," he'd say. "I want to." And on the outside, they looked like a storybook, an ordinary girl swept into extraordinary light. But even in those early days, there were small shadows. Marcus liked his drinks strong and frequent. The nights always stretched later than Emily intended, the music always louder, the laughter always a little too sharp around the edges. Sometimes, when Marcus spoke about having a good time, there was an intensity behind it, something restless, like he was chasing a feeling that never stayed. Emily noticed how quickly celebration became routine. And how, when the front door closed behind them, the glamour didn't always follow them inside. By the second month, Emily didn't just visit Marcus's world, she started living in it. His house sat behind tall gates, framed by trimmed hedges and stone pillars that made Emily feel like she should lower her voice the moment she stepped inside. The halls smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive candles. Even the silence felt curated, like the house had been designed to impress people who never felt impressed. At first, Emily walked through those rooms as if she might leave muddy footprints on the carpet simply by existing. Marcus found that amusing. "You're safe here," he'd tell her, pouring wine into glasses that cost more than her weekly groceries. "Stop acting like you don't belong." And Emily, wanting to believe him, forced herself to smile. Forced herself to relax. She started leaving toiletries in his bathroom. A spare pair of shoes near the door. Noah's little backpack in the guest room. It became normal in a way that frightened her. Marcus adored being the one to change her life. He would glance over at Emily in a restaurant and grin, like watching her eat off fine plates was entertainment. "Try it," he'd insist, pushing the menu back into her hands. "Whatever you want." Emily would argue softly, always the same hesitant line, "It's too much." And Marcus would reply with the same certainty, "Not for me." Sometimes he called her his miracle. Other times, when he'd been drinking, he called her his rescue. At first it sounded romantic. Later, it sounded like possession. The house began to fill with people, Marcus's friends, business contacts, glamorous strangers with sharp teeth behind shiny smiles. They drank as if water was a personal insult. They laughed loudly, talked over one another, spilled secrets in the open, then pretended they'd never said anything. Emily watched them like a tourist in a foreign city. She tried to keep up. She didn't want Marcus looking at her and seeing a girl from a crumbling flat above a shop. So she learned to hold her glass the way his friends did. To laugh at jokes she didn't understand. To dress in clothes Marcus bought that felt like costumes stitched from someone else's identity. At night, when Noah was asleep upstairs, the parties changed shape. The music sank lower, heavier, something pulsing in the walls. Marcus would disappear for moments at a time with certain people, returning brighter-eyed, sharper, his confidence turning into something reckless. Emily didn't ask questions. But she noticed. The first time she saw the little folded packet, she froze. Marcus was in the kitchen, barefoot, shirt unbuttoned, moving with casual ease as if nothing in the world could touch him. He caught her staring, and for a moment his expression hardened, just a flicker, a warning. Then he smiled again. "You don't have to look scared," he said softly. "It's just for fun." Emily swallowed. "Marcus. I don't want that around Noah." "It's not around him," Marcus insisted, almost offended. "It's not even near him." His voice was smooth, persuasive, like a hand guiding her head away from the danger she thought she saw. Emily forced herself to nod. She wanted to be the kind of woman who didn't ruin things. Soon the drinking wasn't just weekend luxury, it became nightly routine. Wine with dinner. Spirits after. A little something to keep the energy up when Marcus didn't want the night to end. And Marcus never wanted the night to end. His mood started stretching wider, like a storm that could switch directions without warning. When he was happy, he was electric, affectionate, magnetic, impossible to resist. He'd dance with Emily barefoot on the marble floor, his hands warm on her waist, his voice murmuring in her ear how beautiful she was, how lucky he was. But when he was irritated, the temperature changed instantly. It could be something small, the wrong music, a missed call, Emily asking if Noah could go home early because he had school in the morning. Marcus would stare at her like she'd offended him. "You're always worried," he'd say. "Always thinking small." Emily would try to soften it. "I'm just tired." "Noah." "Noah is fine," Marcus snapped, cutting her off. Then he'd take a drink. And another. And the moment would pass like a shadow moving away. He never apologized directly. Instead, he'd shower her with gifts the next day. A bracelet. A weekend trip. A phone upgrade. It was his way of patching cracks without ever admitting they were there. Emily started lying to her friends. She told them Marcus was amazing, because she couldn't explain the truth without hearing how wrong it sounded. She told herself that every couple fought. That everyone had flaws. That Marcus loved her. And love, real love, required flexibility. But sometimes, late at night, Emily stood in Marcus's bathroom staring at her reflection, the expensive makeup smudging at the corners, the diamond necklace sitting on her skin like a brand. Her eyes looked unfamiliar. She'd turn on the tap just to hear something louder than her thoughts. And deep down, under all the comfort and glitter, Emily began to feel something she couldn't name yet. A quiet sense of risk. A feeling that Marcus didn't just bring her into a new life. He brought her closer to an edge she hadn't known existed. Emily didn't notice when she stopped calling her flat home. It happened gradually, like a song fading out without anyone touching the volume. One day she realized she'd left a full bag of groceries to spoil in her fridge because Marcus had texted, "Stay tonight." And she'd obeyed without thinking, like her real life was something she could pause and return to later. She told herself it was love. But love wasn't supposed to feel like walking on glass. In Marcus's house, Emily began to measure the atmosphere the way sailors measured wind. She learned to tell what kind of night it would be by the sound of his keys in the door, by the way he kicked off his shoes, by how quickly he reached for a drink. Sometimes he came in glowing, full of stories and charm, pulling her into his arms like she was the best part of the day. Other times, he walked past her without a kiss, already annoyed at something she didn't know about yet. Emily learned not to ask too many questions. Marcus's celebration started taking on a pattern: dinner, drinks, more drinks, loud music, then whatever came next. He kept certain bottles locked in a cabinet like sacred objects. He surrounded himself with people who never said enough. People who acted like consequences were something that happened to other families. Emily didn't like those nights. But Marcus did. And when Marcus wanted something, he had a way of bending reality until saying no felt unnatural. "Come on," he'd say, his voice low and coaxing, one arm slung around her shoulders as if he owned the space between them. "Stop being so tense. We're celebrating." "What are we celebrating?" Emily once asked, trying to smile. Marcus's eyes flashed with mischief. "Us." He pressed a kiss to her cheek, but the affection felt performative, like he was showing her what she should be grateful for. Emily didn't want to be ungrateful. Marcus had given her things she'd never imagined. A wardrobe. A lifestyle. A kind of protection she'd never had growing up. With Marcus, the world didn't push her around. But Marcus pushed in different ways. He began to criticize her quietly, at first as if he was joking. "That dress is cute," he'd say, looking her up and down, "but it makes you look small. You're not small anymore, Emily." Or, "Don't talk about your job like that. It's depressing." Or, "You're too sensitive. You need to toughen up if you want to stay in this world." Emily started apologizing for things that weren't mistakes. And Marcus loved when she apologized. One night, after Noah was asleep, Marcus poured them both drinks in the living room. The rain outside slapped the windows in impatient bursts, and the house felt cold despite its heating. Marcus had been in a restless mood all evening, too quiet, too sharp around the edges. Emily sat on the couch, fingers curled around the glass. "Are you okay?" she asked carefully. Marcus didn't look at her right away. He stared at the amber liquid, swirling it as if hypnotized by it. Then he smiled without warmth. "You know what your problem is?" he said. Emily tensed. "What?" "You still think like a poor girl," Marcus replied, taking a drink. "Always worried. Always scared. You don't realize how lucky you are." Emily tried to keep her voice calm. "I do realize. I'm grateful." Marcus leaned closer, his expression suddenly intense. "Then prove it." The words landed heavy, like a stone thrown into her chest. Emily swallowed. Prove it how? Marcus's eyes flicked over her face, searching for resistance the way someone might search for a locked door. He reached toward her, tracing her jaw with his fingertips. "You're my girl," he murmured. "And I like it when you trust me completely." Emily's skin prickled. She wanted to pull away, but she didn't. Not yet. Because the truth was, Marcus could be frightening in ways that didn't look like fear at first. His anger wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, waiting. And Emily had learned something important: Marcus didn't accept boundaries. He tolerated them, until he no longer felt like it. That night ended with Marcus in a better mood, laughing again like the darkness had never existed. But Emily lay awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside her. She knew something was changing. Not in Marcus. In her. She started to feel like she was being pulled farther and farther from the girl she used to be, into a version of herself shaped by someone else's desires. And then came the first real warning, something she couldn't dress up as romance or misunderstanding. It happened after one of Marcus's gatherings. The house was full of guests, music echoing off the walls. Marcus was animated, drinking heavily, his confidence sharpened into recklessness. At one point Emily saw him take something discreetly from a friend in the hallway, small, hidden, treated like a secret handshake. She felt her stomach turn. Later, when the guests were gone and the silence returned, Marcus wanted the night to continue. He wanted excitement. Noise. Movement. Anything but stillness. Emily told him she wanted to sleep. Marcus stared at her, blinking slowly as if processing a language he didn't recognize. "Sleep," he repeated. "Yes," Emily said, trying to keep it light. "I'm exhausted." Marcus's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Then he stepped closer. The air around him smelled of alcohol and something metallic, like cold coins. "You don't get to leave me alone like that," Marcus said quietly. Emily's heart thudded once, hard. "I'm not leaving you," she said. Marcus grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to remind her he could. His eyes were glossy, fixed. "You think you can take from me?" he whispered. "All this, everything I give you, and then you say no when I want you?" Emily's mouth went dry. "Marcus, you're drunk." Marcus's grip tightened for a moment, then loosened as if he was deciding how far to go. Emily held perfectly still. After a long second, Marcus released her and laughed abruptly, like it was all a joke. "Relax," he said, stepping away. "God, you're dramatic." He walked off toward the kitchen for another drink. Emily stood frozen in the hallway, rubbing her wrist with shaking fingers. That was the moment she knew. The luxury was real. The gifts were real. The image of the glamorous couple, smiling, untouchable, was real. But behind it, beneath the polished floors and expensive wine glasses, something darker lived in Marcus Hale. And Emily Carter was starting to realize she wasn't being rescued at all. She was being swallowed. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a held breath. Emily didn't leave. She told herself she was being sensible, Noah was settled, Marcus was generous, and walking away from comfort felt reckless. But beneath those practical thoughts was something quieter and more dangerous, fear of what Marcus might do if she tried. Marcus sensed the shift in her. He always did. He became sweeter on the surface, more attentive, as if he were correcting an imbalance only he could feel. He booked dinners, surprised her with jewelry, spoke about the future in vague but glittering promises. "We could have everything," he told her one night, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. "You just need to stop doubting us." Emily nodded, though doubt was the only thing growing. The celebrations intensified. What had once been occasional indulgence turned into excess without boundaries. Marcus surrounded himself with people who fed his appetite for extremes, long nights that bled into mornings, substances passed hand to hand like party favors, laughter that sounded too loud, too forced. Emily felt herself drifting through those nights like a ghost. She drank more than she ever had before, partly to numb herself, partly to keep Marcus pleased. When she hesitated, he noticed. "Don't be boring," he'd tease, though his eyes held no humor. "You can handle it." And when she couldn't, when her head spun or her stomach clenched, Marcus would roll his eyes and pour another drink for himself. On the night everything began to unravel, the house buzzed with celebration. Marcus had closed a deal, something important, something that fed his ego like oxygen. He invited a small group over, people Emily recognized by now as catalysts for chaos. Music pulsed through the walls, lights dimmed low, bottles lined the counters like trophies. Emily tried to keep things controlled. She checked on Noah repeatedly, made sure the guest room door stayed closed, told herself this was temporary. Just one more night. Marcus was already far gone by midnight. His movements were loose, his laughter sharp and unrestrained. At one point, Emily watched him take something openly now, no longer careful enough to hide it. Her chest tightened. She pulled him aside near the staircase, lowering her voice. "Marcus, slow down. Please." He looked at her like she'd interrupted something sacred. "Why do you always do this?" he snapped. "Why do you have to ruin everything?" "I'm not trying to ruin anything," Emily said, her voice shaking. "I'm worried about you." Marcus stepped closer, his face inches from hers. She could smell alcohol, feel the heat of his breath. "You don't get to worry about me," he said. "You're here because I let you be." The words cut deeper than any shout. Emily felt the room tilt. She should have walked away then. She should have taken Noah and left. Instead, the night dragged on. By the early hours, the guests were gone, the house echoing with the aftermath of excess, spilled drinks, overturned cushions, the faint ringing of silence after noise. Marcus was restless, pacing, his energy erratic. He didn't want sleep. He wanted intensity. What followed was not tender. It wasn't loving. It was driven by Marcus's need to dominate the moment, to feel powerful, untouchable. Emily tried to slow things down, her body already aching, her mind fogged from alcohol and fear. "Stop," she said at one point, breathless. "Marcus, you're hurting me." But Marcus didn't hear concern. He heard resistance. The situation escalated, voices raised, balance lost, movement near the staircase that led down into darkness. In the confusion, Emily slipped, her body crashing down the steps in a sickening series of impacts that stole the air from her lungs. She landed at the bottom, twisted and broken, pain exploding through her in waves she couldn't understand. Emily tried to speak. Only a weak sound came out. From the top of the stairs, Marcus stared down at her. His face was pale, his eyes wide, not with empathy, but with calculation. "You're fine," he said, though his voice wavered. "Just, stay there." Emily couldn't move. Her body screamed in ways she had never known. Warmth spread beneath her, and terror followed. "Help," she whispered. "Please." Marcus didn't come down. He stood there for a long moment, then turned away. Emily heard his footsteps retreat. Heard a door close. Heard the house settle back into silence. Alone at the bottom of the stairs, Emily faded in and out of awareness, the pain unbearable, her thoughts drifting to Noah, his smile, his laugh, the way he clung to her leg when he was scared. Hours passed. Marcus went to bed. When daylight crept through the windows, the house looked peaceful again from the outside. Inside, Emily Carter lay broken, unheard, and dying, because the man who claimed to love her chose sleep over saving her life. Morning arrived quietly, as if the house itself didn't want to acknowledge what had happened. Marcus woke late, sunlight spilling across the bedroom floor. For a moment, he lay still, his head pounding, fragments of the night floating just out of reach. Then something tugged at his memory, Emily at the bottom of the stairs, her voice thin and frightened. He dressed slowly, moving through the house with careful steps. When he reached the staircase and looked down, the reality waiting there could no longer be ignored. Emily hadn't moved. Panic finally cracked through Marcus's haze. He rushed down, knelt beside her, shaking her shoulder too late, too gently, as if afraid of what he might confirm. Her skin was cold. Her breathing, if it was there at all, was impossible to detect. Marcus staggered back, hands trembling. He called emergency services with a voice that wavered between confusion and performance. He told them there had been an accident. A fall. He said he hadn't realized how badly she was hurt. By the time help arrived, Emily Carter was already gone. The house filled with strangers, uniforms, radios, quiet urgency. Paramedics worked quickly, then slowed, then stopped. One of them shook his head, eyes heavy with a kind of practiced sorrow. Marcus stood off to the side, arms folded tight across his chest, staring at the floor like it might offer him an answer he could live with. Police officers began asking questions. Why had he waited so long to call? Why were there signs of severe injuries inconsistent with a simple fall? Why had neighbors heard nothing, when the house was known for loud gatherings? Marcus's story shifted slightly with each retelling. He was tired. He'd been drinking. He thought she was okay. He hadn't realized the seriousness. But evidence doesn't bend to explanations. The post-mortem revealed what Marcus had hoped wouldn't be found: dozens of injuries, internal damage, bleeding that would have been survivable if help had come sooner. The timeline told a story no one could soften. Emily hadn't died instantly. She had suffered. News of her death spread quickly, and the image of the glamorous couple shattered overnight. Photographs once admired were now studied for warning signs. Smiles were reinterpreted. Moments frozen in time took on new meaning. Emily's family was informed in a small, sterile room that smelled of coffee and paperwork. Her mother collapsed into a chair, disbelief turning into wails that echoed down the hallway. Noah, too young to understand, asked when his mom was coming home. There was no answer gentle enough. Public anger swelled as details emerged. Commentators spoke of privilege, of power, of how easily responsibility had been avoided for hours while a woman lay dying. Marcus was arrested days later. In court, he appeared subdued, dressed plainly, his confidence replaced by something smaller and defensive. He avoided the gallery, where Emily's family sat rigid, grief carved into their faces. The charge was not about intent, it was about failure. Failure to act. Failure to call for help. Failure to choose another human life over his own comfort. Marcus eventually entered a guilty plea to manslaughter through gross negligence. His legal team argued recklessness, impairment, panic. They spoke of a tragic accident, of a man who had made unforgivable mistakes but never meant for anyone to die. Emily's family listened in silence. When the sentence was read, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. It was prison, but not for long enough in the eyes of many. Years measured and limited, weighed against a life that could never be returned. Outside, reporters waited. Headlines followed. Public outrage grew louder. For Emily's loved ones, none of it felt like justice. It felt like a closing door that didn't match the sound of what had been lost. And for Noah, the world had already changed forever, long before any judge spoke a final word. The sentence echoed through the courtroom, then vanished into the low hum of whispered reactions and shuffling feet. For Marcus Hale, it marked an end. For Emily Carter's family, it marked something far worse, a beginning they had never chosen. Emily's mother stood frozen as the judge spoke, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She had imagined this day so many times, imagined that hearing Marcus's fate would bring some sense of balance, some quiet relief. It didn't. Instead, it felt unfinished. Like a story cut short in the middle of its most important sentence. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Marcus was led away. He kept his head down, his face carefully blank, as though refusing to give the world one more expression to analyze. People shouted questions. Some shouted insults. Others shouted Emily's name. Marcus never looked back. For the public, the case became a symbol of privilege, of neglect, of how easily responsibility could be delayed when comfort mattered more than consequence. For a few weeks, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Radio hosts debated. Comment sections burned with anger. Then, slowly, the attention moved on. But grief did not. Emily's family returned to a quiet house filled with her things. A scarf still hanging on the back of a chair. A mug she never finished washing. Her laughter, once loud and warm, now reduced to memory. The hardest part was Noah. He asked for his mother at night, his small voice breaking the silence. He asked why she hadn't come home. He asked if she was angry with him. There was no way to explain a chain of adult decisions to a child whose world had collapsed. Emily's mother took him in, learning how to pack lunches again, how to read bedtime stories through tears. Every milestone Noah reached felt both beautiful and devastating, because Emily wasn't there to see them. In prison, Marcus adjusted to a life stripped of luxury. The gates, the silence, the sameness of days, all of it was a shock. Some nights, he replayed the moment at the top of the stairs. Other nights, he pushed it away, telling himself the same story he'd told everyone else. That it was an accident. That he hadn't known. That he'd panicked. But the truth lived somewhere deeper, where excuses couldn't reach. Emily had trusted him. And when it mattered most, he had chosen himself. Years would pass. Marcus would one day walk free. Emily would never walk again. Her name would fade from headlines, but not from the lives she touched. Not from the child who would grow up with only stories of her kindness. Not from the family who would always measure time by before and after. Emily Carter was more than a cautionary tale or a courtroom debate. She was a young mother who wanted safety. A woman who believed love could change her life. And her story stands as a quiet, haunting reminder that sometimes the most devastating harm doesn't come from one single moment, but from the choice to do nothing, when doing something could have saved a life.